Well, hey there, and welcome to another episode of the Church Leadership Lab podcast, the show that is dedicated to inspiring leaders and empowering healthy churches. We do that through conversations, interviews, and stories as we explore what's happening in ministry today and how pastors and leaders can navigate what lies ahead. I am Kendall Connor, and I'm joined today by my co-host, Jessica Moore. Hey there, Jess. How are you?
Hey, Kendall. Good morning. Happy to be here.
Yeah, really excited to jump into our conversation today. It's a good day for a podcast, don't you think?
It is. It is. Yep. Feeling like a Friday. You just said it.
I love it. We've got a great one planned. Joining us today is a very special guest, the legendary in the church communication space, the one and only Katie Allred. And you may not know this, Jess. She has actually been on our podcast before, but it's pretty cool because this is the first time that we have been able to have a conversation with her since we started hosting. And
okay,
so
cool. I didn't know you were on before, but we're really glad to have you again.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome to be able to jump into that conversation with her. And, you know, it's just it's really cool. For everyone who's listening, if you've never heard of or been able to connect with Katie before, let me tell you a little bit more about her. Katie is the founder of churchcommunications.com and leader of an online community that I'm a part of. I'm in that community regularly, a community of 30,000 plus church leaders worldwide, which is just incredible. And then when she isn't doing that, you can find her teaching at different universities where she is a professor, speaking at different conferences, and writing at katieallred.com. She is a thought leader on marketing, business, and Christian leadership. She also has published a book on communications, which is all just really, really incredible. And I can also I can tell you, Jess, before we jump into that conversation with her, coming from leading a online community myself, being able to know someone else in that space who's also leading a big group on Facebook, being able to go back and forth and ask questions, she has helped me out several times when I needed a second opinion, which is just amazing. So that's why I'm particularly excited to jump into our conversation, because today we're going to be talking about how churches can use AI to save time and communicate better. And so Before we jump into that conversation, Jess, I'm just kind of curious, are you a big AI user? Do you use that?
More and more. I feel like as my workload increases, the more I'm leveraging it, which is great. And it's still relatively new, but it is incredible how much time it saves. So, was using it this morning.
It is a big time saver. Yeah. And that's why I'm excited to jump into the conversation with her today. I know that she's going to bring so much wisdom on this topic, particularly when it comes to communications, but I know that it will go even beyond that. And so without further ado, I want to jump in to our conversation today. So, hey there, Katie, how are you?
Hi, friends. I'm good.
So thankful to have you on here.
I'm glad to be here. It's always fun.
Yeah, I was just telling Jess about. I know that you lead this huge Facebook group that you're have been a part of that for a really long time. Do you consider yourself a Facebook group pro by this point?
Well, I did lead the team at Facebook in Facebook groups. So at this point,
I mean, what a flex right out of the gate. We got a flex. I mean,
I know.
Has written the book on church communications, not only led a successful Facebook group, but also worked with Facebook and making that happen. I mean, I don't know how you top that.
Well, you know, I tried to tell you to turn it down a little. I was like, I don't know. I think I was a little strong. Let's turn that down a couple notches.
That's amazing, Katie. Those are two far ends of the spectrum, like leading church communications. And then, I mean, obviously there's a ton of overlap, but
it's a very strange overlap, to be fair, you know, but I'm not your normal bird. So there's that. Yeah.
Well, digital groups in general are just, I mean, I'll just speak from my tiny experience and being a remote employee, right? So you want to build engagement and foster team building. And it's it's really hard to do that.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
nothing
tough.
tops being in a room with people and there's a
Yeah.
whiteboard and you can, brainstorm together like that. There's magic that happens there. So facilitating that type of engagement digitally is.
Yeah. Well, it's especially tough when they're not paid to be there, remote workers, at least you're paid to put up with that nonsense. But, in the other sense, you're just there because you want to be there. So that's the difference. And that's difficult, right? Like, and there's a lot of fun ways you can get remote workers involved. It was something I really loved about being at Meta, was learning about how to do that, like engage in a remote culture. But because there's ways you can whiteboard online and do those sort of things. So the world is crazy. Who knows?
It is. Lots of change since 2022.
Oh yeah.
Absolutely. Well, of course, we read the public bio, and then we've got all the extras there. But is there anything else? Something we always like to ask, Katie, is there something that doesn't make the public bio that maybe all your family and friends would know about you?
So, yes. I also do improv.
Wow. I'm telling you, this is kind of surprising. You got to tell us more about this.
I don't know. I've taken a bunch of classes, and I, go to a local comedy club and support my local comedy. And
amazing.
It's more fun. It's not stand up. I tried stand up. I did one stand up class and I was terrible. I tanked so bad. But I tried it. I had a solid 5 minutes by the end of it. But I just was like, this is so nerve wracking.
Wow.
And so improv's like this. This is improv. Like what you're doing right now is improv. Like. And also it really helped. It's funny, I got into improv because I actually took a class called Improv for Anxiety.
Wow.
And it really actually helped my anxiety. I know people are like, I think that would give me anxiety. It would give me a panic attack. But, the thing about improv is that you can't plan to be funny. You are just funny because it's a mistake.
Yeah, that's good.
The best parts of improv are when people totally blow it. So you have to learn to be comfortable with failure.
I love that.
And a lot of leadership lessons coming out of this improv.
And there's so much. Actually, there's such a great class on Masterclass with Amy Poehler about improv and how it changed her life. And very much in the same sense, like improv is very much about living in the present. You can't plan the future. And so that's, one of the best, I guess, parts of it that I took away from it and still really love about it. It's just fun. It's play also, as adults, like how often do you get to play? Because you're building a playground that other people have to play on, right? You walk into a scene and there's nothing.
Yeah.
And you're just like, okay, now we're all in a kitchen baking some brownies or whatever. Like you have to, build the scene and the playground that people play on.
I'm convinced at this point. I'm convinced I've got to look up. All right, North Carolina
improv classes near you. Yeah, you should do it for sure.
Got to figure this out.
Actually, the comedy club that is called Third Coast Comedy, they have a nonprofit that I did the improv for anxiety class through, and they do offer it online, the improv for anxiety class. So just, I would recommend it. And then you could learn something about facilitating via Zoom fun activities for your team.
Half of the pastors who are listening to this, already feel like they have a little bit of a comedy routine in their sermons on Sunday mornings. Myself included. When I speak, come on, I got to try to bring in a little bit of comedy. But I'm just thinking, man, I've got to ramp this up. All right, I actually feel like we could do a whole episode just on this topic, but I want to move into the meat and potatoes of let's talk church communications. Let's talk AI. And I know that these are things that you're very passionate about.
Sure.
I've personally heard you speak, and again, have literally written books on the subject and led groups. Church communications is an area that you've been involved with for a long time. But these days, I do see you speaking a lot more on the topic of AI. And I just want to kind of, are you still passionate about the communication side, or is there kind of an intersection between these two different worlds?
Yeah, I mean, I will never not be passionate about church communication,
Yeah.
unfortunately. I think once you work in that world, or like, I think, I cared about it when I didn't even know what it was. As a child, I was like, why is there 3 fonts in this bulletin? So I think I will always care.
Amen. Amen.
Unfortunately, right? But yeah, AI and comms totally intersect. I mean, honestly, like a lot of what you do with AI is comm work. And so what I love about it is that it can make it you more efficient, because we can't replace you and your time for actual ministry.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
For you to actually be in a hospital, or for you to actually be helping someone in need, like,
Yes.
we can't replace that time with AI. That's not happening. But what we can do is make you faster at writing emails. We can help you get that church bulletin out faster, help you write a description for your event or whatever. There's so many things that it can just help you put together so much faster, so that you can get back to work that matters.
Mm.
And there's plenty of conversation on the scary side of AI. There's plenty of conversation on people who are hesitant to get into it. And to be honest, we've had episodes already in our archive of discussing those things. And I don't really want to spend a lot of time there today, because I feel like maybe we're getting to the point where folks are starting to realize, like, it's like it's a tool. It's a time-saving tool. It isn't going to be able to take away our jobs on the things that are actually important, as you just spoke on. But it's like a calculator, right? And so, it just makes your job easier, faster, and, you can kind of set aside some of the things. I want to ask you, though, when it does come to efficiency, saving time, how are you seeing AI, be able to help with things like, so think communication, social media, emails.
Yeah.
How are you saying, what are some simple ways that churches can use AI for those kind of tasks?
Yeah, well, there's so many different ways that it can help. So anywhere from like content planning to like automating your workflows, personalizing your work. I think there's so much that segmenting your audience for the first time, perhaps going into social media, like obviously content planning is a part of that, but like creation is a huge part of that. So like, I remember it used to take 3 different people over a day's time to get a sermon clip, like one sermon clip done by the end of Monday, right? And then the next day we would pretty much do it all over again. But then, and it took it was a long period. Like, it took somebody to read through the transcript. It took another person to cut the clip, and it took another person to post the clip.
Yeah.
And so, it was just, and then obviously, and somebody had to write a caption. It became like this whole thing, where now that is cut down into like 10 minutes or less using certain tools. So it's just wild to me that is a possibility. Yeah.
That's amazing. Awesome. You mentioned segmenting your audience, and my brain immediately went to like, using AI also to crunch some data. So if you happen to use a church management software and you've got birth dates in there, right? And you happen to know how old people are in your congregation, exporting that data and then putting it into AI can help you. I mean, there's so many uses. Right now we're talking about communication, but you just triggered that thought of like, I hadn't even considered utilizing the data that you already have somewhere else to then help with communications and, understand your congregation better. Right. What a great concept.
Yeah. And if you're worried about anonymity when it comes to that data, like just pulling the dates, no names, you could still segment your audience to find that, hey, you have a bunch of baby boomers, you have this certain generation in your audience, right?
Yes.
And how you should cater to them, like by percentages. Yeah. So like you might have 60% baby boomers and 20% millennials or whatever. And so figuring out how you can target them exactly is I feel like really good data. It's really good to know. So
yeah. That's great. It allows you to communicate more directly too. Yeah, that's great. Okay, so looking at different church sizes, What's your process for helping them assess their current technology usage and identify where AI could help in their streamline?
Yeah, well, that really starts with an audit. And so we've come up with this plan called Launch Point, where we kind of take them through this whole plan of like doing a technology and like comms audit to see where their processes are right now and find where we could actually save time. So we're going to look at like everything from what is your email system? Like, what are you using to share docs right now? Like, are you using Google Docs?
Yes.
Are you using SharePoint? I actually, before all of this, it's so funny. Like, I don't include this in my bio, but I was a network administrator for university for like 5 years.
Oh, wow.
And just, a random thing I did. But I administrated Google Workspace and I oversaw the learning management system and SharePoint and all this stuff. It was a small university, so I wore a lot of hats. And that was something I just realized, wow, everybody at this university is doing something different. They're all doing it differently. Mm-hmm. Each department is living in their own bubble, doing this a certain way, when really we could streamline this to where we're all doing the same process. We're all working out of the same database. We're all doing similar processes that save time. And so that's something I think we could look at. I mean, even like the process of connection cards, and instead of typing them in manually, scanning them in and letting a screen reader, read those cards or whatever. There's tools that can read text now, right? So, and handwriting. So I think that that's something that we're going to see more of, but it's something that, is maybe a little scary at first, but also will save you a lot of time meanwhile, so people can, go back to a job that is meaningful.
Wow. And it's just super practical question. There may be leaders who are listening to this today. They have not jumped into using AI at all. Yeah. What software would you recommend for, someone who's first getting into this? Where's the best place to start?
There are so many.
I feel like a new one pops up every day, right?
Every single day there is a new one, and they all have different cost.
Yes.
And so that's where I really recommend you joining our AI for Churches Facebook group. It's part of church communications as well. Yeah. So just a separate team of it. And you can ask that question, like, what are you trying to do? Because I could say ChatGPT is a great place to get started. And it is. Like it is, it's a solid one, and it's free for, a lot of interaction. So you get, what you need from it pretty quickly. But at the same time, it may not actually be the best fit for you. Claude might be better if you're writing content, or, are you producing images? I don't think ChatGPT's DALL-E is the best image producer.
Wow. And those two are probably like the most common, right? Those are the household names for AI at this point in the game, right?
Yeah, and I think Google Gemini is also raising to the top, as the fact that, now it has the Gemini results at the top of every Google search result. So you're going to see more and more people recognize it. Also, it's being integrated into Docs and across the Drive software.
And I even think it's becoming more mainstream, right? I think about how iPhones just recently got an update, and now they have Apple Intelligence built right in, which you can integrate your ChatGPT and maybe some other AI platforms in there at the same time. And so it is becoming a little bit more common, would you say?
Yeah, 100%. And also, like, there's so many tools that are becoming integrated to the point that you don't even realize it's AI anymore. Yes. And so I think that's like why it's interesting when people have holdbacks about it, because I'm like, well, you're kind of already using it. I mean,
know.
If your phone is unlocking with your face, like, you're using AI. Like, that is AI. Like, the Netflix recommendations are AI. The algorithm on Facebook is AI. Like, it's just, a different form of it, where this is actually like maybe helping you, because you're telling it what to do instead of it telling you what to do. Right. That's I feel like the very difference, right? Yeah. And so I think, if people have holdbacks, that's kind of silly at this point because we're already using it, but to this point, there's different tools now, right?
Yeah, and I think maybe one of the biggest things is the people who have holdbacks. They want to make sure that AI is not writing your sermon. If you were to put it in a sentence, right? That's people want to make sure. People want to make sure that you're still being Holy Spirit led, right? That you're praying about it before you talk to ChatGPT about it, right?
Right. Yeah. And it just can't replace. It's like improv.
Come on.
I can't, you can't improv. You can't like put it into ChatGPT and ask it to like help you come up with improv. I mean, you could, but it may not be very funny. Like it's just the truth. I mean, eventually maybe it will be hilarious. I have no idea, but like you can't. That would become acting. It's not improv. And so to me, like preaching is improv because you're acting in the moment. I mean, you can have a plan of where you're going. There's lots of pastors who I know preach from a monologue or whatever. Sure. But yeah, at the end of the day, the Holy Spirit still leads and guides and directs you, hopefully. And if you're doing it correctly, I think. And so there's no way it can replace. Now, can it help you with the sermon?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think
Come
it
on.
can help you 100%. We have a tool called Sermon Spark that helps people like come up with metaphors or like can help you come up with questions or whatever.
What's the difference in going to, I've literally purchased books in the past to help that, sermon illustrations, things like that. It's like that, but better.
Right. Yeah. Or, you've purchased, the, what are they? The, oh my gosh, commentaries. I was going to say contemporaries. I was like, that's not it. Commentaries. That go along with the scripture. It's very similar. Of course, though, it's pulling from the web. So, and who knows whose theological interpretation is giving you. You can tell it to act like this certain person or whatever. But, at the end of the day, you should use your best judgment because your church will interpret scripture differently. You will interpret scripture differently. Sure. That's the beauty of Christianity is that it's a big mystery and we're all trying to figure it out together.
I love that. Okay. Shifting gears to social media. Obviously, that's a huge factor in how churches communicate right now. And so what tips would you give church leaders or staff members who are overseeing social media to help kind of create content, but even visual content? What are some ideas and tips, best practices?
Yeah, well, there's some really great tools out there now. One that I really love is Sermon Shots. Corey is in our Facebook group and takes really great feedback from the community when they ask for certain things. And what I love about it is, you upload your sermon or you can like connect your YouTube and it'll pull the best clips for you. You don't even have to like sit there and listen to it or like read it. It'll automatically have like certain clips made that it thinks would do well on social media. And then you can download it in whatever size you need, squares or story format or whatever, and then post it directly from there, which is insane. I remember this taking me so much time, right?
Me too.
So it's incredible to see it be so much faster. Yeah, I was so annoyed when I saw it the first time because I was so used to having to physically do it,
So follow-up question, how does the AI know what will generate engagement?
That's a good question. I think that it's obviously running it through. It's making a transcript of your sermon.
Sure.
Yes.
And then it's running it against their large language model.
Okay.
And probably pulling things that it sees similarly across the model. And so things that it sees that had impact in the past or whatever from that data, right? So it might be saying, oh, well, we scraped Facebook back in 2022 and somebody posted something very similar and it got 500 likes. So we're going to do something similar. I have no idea exactly how that works, but that's still like an example of how I believe it works in my head.
Yeah, with that monologue and that voice. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love it.
I was trying to think of some more practical examples, and to be honest, even examples of how in my own church where I serve, right, practical ways that church leaders can use AI in their just their daily life and their daily work. And you know, I think about how many times I've asked for examples of, you know, I led a devotion at our church's prayer meeting not long ago, and I was trying to come up with examples of what are some examples of the storms of life.
Yeah.
And perfect question, right? Yes. To ask ChatGPT, okay, now what are some examples of struggles, the storms of life? Boom, you've got a list of 10 of them that you can pull from in your examples. But it's more than that, right?
Yeah.
Can you give some practical examples that churches could use it for?
Yeah, you know, well, what's great is that once you have a transcript of the sermon, or you even have sermon notes, you can take those sermon notes, dump them into AI and say, give me a discussion guide. Give me an icebreaker
for small groups, right?
So you can turn it into a book, like you like rewrite this so it makes sense for like a chapter in a book. Like, it really can like turn around and make your ideas so much more than what you had before, and it can help just, I don't know, create that content so that you can get back to like community engagement, right? So like you can use those questions obviously in your small groups, but you can use them online too, like turn around and use them on Facebook or whatever, and get people to respond, say, hey, we talked about this in our small groups this week. What, you know, do you have something you want to share to the rest of our congregation or whatever? And I think there's just so much more that we have only scratched the surface at, for sure. You know, another thing that I really love, and I feel like not a lot of churches know about quite yet, is Microsoft Copilot. Now, I mean, I think we like know about it, but like unless you're using SharePoint or if that's where you're housing your like files, there's a way now in Copilot to change it to just work instead of scraping. So it'll scrape from work files instead of scraping from the web. Wow. And so it can scrape across your entire organization's files, and you can ask it, what did this person do yesterday? It will read their calendar and tell you like what meetings they're in or whatever, if it's public, of course. Right. Sure. It won't pull private files, but if the files are shared publicly, you can be like, what did we do last year for this event? Yes. What target audience was this event for? You can ask it some really great in-depth questions and see if the data is already there from files across your organization, right? And that would save so much time to just know like what has been done in the past, and where you're going with it in the future. Just being able to chat with it's like a really smart like person in your church, or like an elder that has been there for 500 years. And you're like, I need to know where that file was from 1992.
You got to know, Katie, you just sent our listeners today on a real roller coaster just there, because the first thing you said is it's going to tell everybody how you spent your time last week, right? And so people were starting to get nervous. And then the next one was, you're going to be able to find out when we had an event, or, you know, when we had baptisms back in 2005, right? And so they got really excited because they weren't going to have to dig through the bulletins. So that was a little bit of a roller coaster, the scary and then the exciting.
It's nerve-wracking and like also amazing all at the same time, right? And like, I mean, if somebody's accounting for all of your time, that's micromanagement. Don't do that. That's terrible.
That's another conversation, right?
Yeah. No, don't do that. And some people don't keep calendars, but like, and like I said, you don't have to make it public. So it really is like what you choose to share. But I think it's just really exciting to be able to know you can scrape across like, it also like pulls from like people's emails and stuff across the org, like depending on the person or that kind of thing. Cause like people leave, right? And then they have really valuable information. And so just, having those conversations and having a place where you can pull this data is incredible to be able to save that.
Yes.
Time savings. What I'm hearing too is, you know, if as a ministry, if you're not already kind of working within a unified space, and you alluded to this when you talked about your job at the university, but if you're not already kind of operating in a unified workspace, because running an organization, whether it's a church, a nonprofit, an actual business, for-profit business, if your team, small or large, is operating kind of all over the map, it is to your detriment. It's just a lack of efficiency, right? So step number one, before you even dive into AI, at least for internal operational pieces, get on the same page, right? Get on the same page. And then the beauty of that is the collaborative piece digitally, being able to lean into AI to help with operations. That's such a great way to use it, right? In addition to communications, but that's a great thought.
Yeah, because this won't work if you're all in different systems.
Yeah.
So figuring out and sticking to one system is really helpful. That's part of what we kind of help churches choose and decide, because I don't think Google Gemini is that far away from doing something very similar across Drive for organizations. So, I imagine that would be probably coming pretty soon. And I feel like it's going to be pretty normal across all workplaces to have these kind of technologies that connect us. So it's just a matter of time, but being prepared for that coming is, I feel really important. So that's what we're trying to do, even though sometimes it feels like, wait, are we at the right place at the right time? Sure. And, it feels like maybe it's a little ahead of itself, but at the same time, there's never a wrong time to get all on the same page.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Kind of, on that same topic of being on the same page, you're going to have multiple people in a church that are using tools like this. And then one of the I feel like problems that I run into when I'm trying to use AI or any of these tools for my own church is we'll ask for a social post or we'll ask for an event announcement. But the problem that I run into, and maybe some of our listeners have shared this experience with me, the answers that we get back don't feel like our church. Do you have any tips for prompts or things like that can, and especially as you're sharing it across multiple people, that you can make, how can you make these tools work for you to make it sound and feel like your specific community?
Yeah. I think it's more than prompting. So I think it's about context. And so you have to give it context about who you are and where you are. And if you want to do that in an organizational wide situation, one of the best ways to do that would probably be creating a custom GPT. It's something that we are doing for churches now, and it's working really well of being able to, help them put, have their brand style guide, have their voice guide, and perhaps they don't even have these documents. And that's something we're helping them do too, because we do communication, right? So helping them realize, we do need these documents so we can tell ChatGPT how to use it. And so having all those things in that place and programmed into a custom GPT, a user across an organization can choose to use that custom GPT, and then it will continue to sound like the church every single time because you're sharing a common thread.
Yes.
And so it has that knowledge plugged into it already to know I need to speak in this friendly tone. We don't use AM, PM with dots.
Yeah.
Wow,
and that's important. Every
important.
church is so different. It's so funny.
Yes.
I can remember working at the church, right, and writing web content, and that being a big deal on, do we capitalize AM or PM, or, do we say, do we initialize our name, right? Do we say BBC or do we say Brentwood Baptist Church? And so it was very figuring out those style guide things are really important. And then also putting it into ChatGPT so that everybody can use, or Claude can do this too. There's so many different ways. It really just kind of depends on what your needs are and where you want to go with it.
This is blowing my mind because, like I said, I use AI to help with my work all the time, but I've never considered feeding it information as a baseline foundation for this is how I always want to sound. This is how we always talk about X, Y, and Z. Yeah. On the flip side, though, I will say, in addition to everything we've talked about, I think there is so much value to humanizing everything that comes through AI as well. And so it should go without saying, but it's also worth saying because we have folks that are listening that are probably all over the map, have never used it before or use it every day. But always proofread, right? Not for grammatical errors, because those are most likely not going to happen, but for content, for voice, for like Kendall alluded to it with, even your sermons. There, you may read through something and say that doesn't sound
genuine,
like us. I mean, that's what we're talking about.
Sound like us.
Yeah, I feel like we need to say this different because the Holy Spirit's telling me to say this different. I mean, you can never replace that. That intimate personalization, knowing your people, knowing 100%. Who's reading and who you're speaking to. AI can't know that, no matter
It's all about context, right? I mean, it's about setting the context, and it's about the context that comes out. Like when you have it, like setting the context again for who you're sending it to, right?
Yes.
And so, because you're going to know better than anybody else. But again, you're going to know better than the AI will. So you've got to tell it what you know. Otherwise, it's just going to pull from the ether.
Right.
And that's not good either. So you really have to set it up for success. That's actually something we have cohorts. AI cohorts are like $99 for the month. So I teach 4 classes on AI, and that's part of what we teach is that like context setting part, which I think is really important.
Yeah. No, that's a great call out, Jess, and a great point of just, at the end of the day, these listeners, you're going to be responsible for what you print in that bulletin or put on that website and all of these things. You definitely got to make sure that it's factual, that it sounds like your church and, is going to be right. So it's still going to fall on you at the end of the day. We're not off the hook quite yet when it comes to this
not
stuff,
yet.
right?
Yeah. I mean, you could be, but then, it's so important to be engaged and connected in some capacity.
100. Yes, 100%. I think what Katie has said is making sure that you freeing up more time to spend time on the things that matter most, and simplifying maybe some of those other processes when it comes to that. So absolutely. Katie, I'm just curious, how would you encourage church leaders who are listening to this today, that say, they are ready to jump into something like this, but they just feel overwhelmed? Well, how would you encourage them?
Why would I encourage them? That's a good question. Well, like I said, I think you just should spend your time doing ministry and not doing work like this a lot of times. And so even if it's writing an email back, it can save you time. Again, you have to like read it for the context. You can't just be shooting off a bunch of AI emails without reading them, because you might agree to something you didn't want to agree to. But I think, it's about getting back to what's important, and also just being on the same page. Like I said, I think what we're realizing with AI is that if you're not using consistent work streams across your church and across your organization, you're going to see some mass chaos come out of this. So you might as well get ahead of the stream. Also, you're going to end up paying for so many tools because there's literally so many. And instead of doing that, you can really focus and hone in on one and make it really great, because, as you're building something, it's going to continue to get better.
100%. No, this has been great to talk through. Something that we love to do before we wrap up is to do a rapid fire round of questions. Katie, would you be up for that today?
I would love to.
Jessica, do you want to start us off on our rapid fire?
Sure. What is one book, either on this topic or not, that you would recommend to church leaders?
Yeah, I mean, I did write a book called Church Communication, so I do recommend it. I think it's a good starting place.
We'll link that up in the show notes for sure. You
can't know how to get started unless you know how to get started. Like, that's the thing. Like, AI is only as smart as you are sometimes, and I think, especially when it comes to chain of prompting, it's chain of thought. And you can ask it to write you a book. Like, you just be like, write me a book on this, but like, that's terrible. It's going to come up with like 1,000 words and it's going to be crappy. What you should do is like actually do your chain of thought. And you can't do that unless you have a good like foundation of what that thought should be, which is like, how do I even come up with a communications plan and what that looks like? So the book really explains that. I wrote it like I was trying to explain it to an 18-year-old because I was teaching college at the time and teaching kids that didn't know anything about marketing at all. And so didn't even know what that word meant. So I was like, let me just like back this all the way up. Like, what does this mean? What does that mean? And yeah, I mean, it has no theological perspective whatsoever. So I think any church can use it and benefit, because it really is a very basic primer on how to do communications.
That's so great. And going back to those basics is always a good idea.
Yeah,
absolutely. What would you say is the last thing that you listen to on Apple Music, Spotify, wherever you listen to your music these days?
Oh my gosh. I don't know. Hold on. Oh, you know what? I totally just like looked up yesterday. Oh my gosh, what was it? Cowboy Take Me Away by
Dixie Chicks. The Chicks.
Yeah, the Chicks. That's what I was listening to yesterday.
Oh my gosh, I love it.
I wouldn't say that's normal. I think I heard it like on a TikTok and it got stuck in my head. And I was like, I must listen to this song now for some reason. But then like, my normal like top number one on Spotify is Khalid, which is such a random, I think people like really underestimate him. And I teach at MTSU. He went to MTSU and he actually did a concert last year at the university, and I just really loved it. And I love him. I think he's an amazing artist. So yeah.
That's awesome. That also opposite ends of the spectrum.
People were not expecting
me, Katie. That's beautiful.
I like to keep them on their toes.
That's right. Keep them guessing.
Okay, I feel like I know the answer to this one. Feels like a cheat question for you, but what is your favorite piece of technology or software?
Ooh.
Oh, maybe not as predictable as I thought.
No, well, it changes every day. Yeah, it really depends on the context. Like, am I coming up with a recipe? Am I cooking?
How about just as like an everyday, I know that I need this near me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I can live without my without ChatGPT now. I tried, and I was failing miserably. And even for cooking, like the other day I was like, I don't have this ingredient, I have this. Like, what can I do? And it just told me what to do. And I was like, oh my gosh, are you like the grandma that I need now in my life, like to tell me how to do this? Thank you.
Give me recipe advice as if you're speaking like my grandmother. That's.
Oh my gosh, it would love that. Amazing.
So funny. What is a quote or maybe some advice that's kind of stuck with you over the years?
That's a good question. I think, just being open and honest and working through whatever might come. I think that's what improv has taught me is you've got to like really live in that moment and of course you can make things happen. Like I think that's what I've talked a lot about today is like you've got to set up like similar workspaces, but at the same time like knowing that something else is coming your way is always going to happen. So just being open to whatever that might be, I think it's really important to like keep your arms and hands open to receiving whatever comes. Yeah.
No, that's really good advice. And, I'd ask this as we kind of wrap up today. What's one thing that you would like to communicate to our audience of church leaders?
Yeah, my pastor, when I worked at the church, he used to always say the first Reformation was about giving the word back to the people, but the second Reformation will be about giving ministry back to the people.
Ooh. Wow.
And I think that AI will help us do that because it's going to free up your time so that you can pour into people and make ministers. Like that is what we're supposed to be doing and not just like admin work. And so I think we've gotten so caught up in what church should be or what it needs to be and the systems behind it that we can't give that up. And so if we can't give it up, then we need to do something to replace it. And I think we can figure that out with AI, so you can get back to actually like teaching people how to minister and then also being a minister yourself.
Wow, that's so good.
That
This has
aligns
been
with
an incredible conversation. You've mentioned a couple of times your services that you offer. Where can people follow you? Where can they find you, or be able to connect and use some of these services that you've mentioned?
Yeah, so you can go to this is an interesting URL. I'm so sorry to everyone involved, but you'll remember it now. It's ai-for-churches.com. And then you can go to churchcommunications.com. You can also find us obviously on Facebook, AI for Churches or Church Communications, either group. And we would be happy to connect and communicate. KatieAllred.com is where I'm at if you want to just try to connect with me directly, and then I can point you in the right direction of what you might need.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us on here. It's been an amazing conversation. Katie, we're so thankful.
Yeah, thank you.
And as always, Jess, thank you for co-hosting with me, for being on here with us today for this convo. And then for everyone who's listening, thank you for sticking with us today and for tuning in. If it was valuable to you, the one thing that we would ask from you is to just help us to get the word out about this podcast to more and more people. Maybe you have a friend who's serving in ministry or someone on your church staff or team that would benefit from hearing some of the conversations that we've had today. Please just share it. Send over a link to it. If you're listening on one of the podcast platforms today, a simple follow goes a really long way. Those reviews on the podcast platforms go a really long way. And if you're watching over on YouTube, which I say, why not? You get to see us and all these fun conversations that we have. You definitely hit that subscribe button on YouTube so that you can stay in the loop. But until next time, thank you for being here with us. And we will see you next time right here on Church Leadership Lab.
This episode of the Church Leadership Lab podcast is brought to you by Ministry Brands, the largest provider of church technology software. Over 90,000 churches rely on Ministry Brands for their single platform solution that brings together all the digital tools a church needs. From online giving to websites to church management software and more, Ministry Brands is leading the way in simple to use, innovative solutions, all with the goal of empowering healthy churches. To learn more, visit ministrybrands.com.